Walk into Berlin in 1923, and you're not entering an economy, you're stepping into a slow-motion national suicide. A loaf of bread jumps from 250 marks to 20,000. A cup of coffee triples in price while you're still drinking it. And the worst part? None of this was an accident. Germany's central bank didn't just fail. It became the engine that torched its own currency, vaporized its middle class, and cracked open the political void that monsters would later crawl out of. This isn't a story about crazy inflation. It's a story about how a modern country chooses to destroy itself, one banknote at a time. Germany enters 1923 already half dead, crushed by Versailles, stripped of industry, and forced to pay reparations it couldn't possibly afford. The country has no gold, no savings, no exports worth enough to matter. The government has only one tool left, printing money, and the man running the machine is Rudolf Havenstein, a loyal bureaucrat who mistakes obedience for intelligence. When France invades the Ruhr to extract reparations by force, Germany responds with the dumbest patriotic idea imaginable: a general strike. Millions stop working. And the government promises to pay them anyway. With what? With paper, with ink, with fantasies. Havenstein floods the country with marks at a rate no central bank had ever attempted. He isn't solving anything. He's liquefying the currency. Presses run 24/7. Dozens of private companies are hired just to pump out emergency notes. The more he prints, the more the currency collapses, and the more he thinks he needs to print. The middle class sees the trap before the government does. Savings evaporate. Pensions die. People sprint to spend their wages the second they receive them, because waiting even 1 hour means losing half their purchasing power. Shopkeepers change prices by the minute. Money stops functioning as money. People barter bacon for medical care, eggs for clothing, coal for anything. Farmers refuse to sell food. Cities starve. Riots break out, and Havenstein's solution: print higher denominations. Millions, billions, trillions. Wet ink on cheap paper shipped under armed guard because it was worthless before it even dried. By the time $1 is worth 4.2 trillion marks, Germany is barely a country. Separatists rise. Communists prepare uprisings. And a failed artist in Munich watches the middle class collapse and prepares his own future. The government finally snaps out of its coma. The old policy dies. A Havenstein himself dies. And Germany attempts one of the greatest confidence tricks in economic history: a new bank. A new currency backed by nothing but a collective lie. And a new hardline enforcer, Jalmar Schacht, to force the government off its printing addiction. It works only because everything else is already burnt to ash. This wasn't a natural disaster. It was a man-made economic suicide that opened the door to political nightmares. Even after the Rentenmark stabilized prices, the damage was permanent. The middle class, the backbone of Germany, was erased. Savings, bonds, pensions, gone. Families who had scrimped and planned for decades were now destitute. Their entire financial world evaporated. Meanwhile, speculators, debtors, and those with foreign currency thrived. The lesson was brutal. Obey the rules, and the state will crush you. Cheat the system, and you survive. The psychological wound was deeper than the financial one. Trust in banks. Gone. Trust in government. Gone. Faith in law or fairness. Gone. Germany entered the mid-1920s with its cities rebuilt, its currency stable, but its people traumatized and bitter. Any future crisis would hit harder because the citizens had nothing to fall back on. And hit harder it did. In 1929, the Great Depression struck. Germany had no savings, no safety nets, no resilient institutions. The hyperinflation had cleared the middle class, leaving a society polarized between the desperate poor and the unscrupulous rich. Political extremism was no longer fringe, it was fertile ground. Radical voices, long ignored, now commanded attention. Adolf Hitler, once a failed painter and rabble-rouser, had already seen how a state could fail its own people. He had studied the collapse, internalized the anger, and prepared for the moment when he could claim himself as the savior of the betrayed middle class. The Reichsbank's destruction in 1923 wasn't just economic. It was the spark that ignited a social and political inferno. A nation that had once prided itself on order and discipline had been burned alive by its own institutions. And the consequences would... If you actually want history without filters, sugarcoating, or political fairy tales, then support the channel. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me where you're rewatching from, because understanding stories like this isn't optional. It's how you stop the same mistakes from repeating.